Okay, so here we're going to try to wrap up the last part of this chapter, and we're going to cover Ross chapter 12, points 6 and 7. This is on Ross page 103 and 104 and 105. So in 12.6, we come to the syntax of the construct chain or the bound phrase. Remember, construct chain, bound phrase, and genitive phrase are all used interchangeably. And a syntax here has to do with how the words must be arranged in a particular order. So let's talk about the syntax of construct chains. Point number one here is that there is a fixed or an invariant order of nouns when it comes to creating construct chains. That is, the construct form of the noun must be followed by the absolute noun in that order from right to left, and they are going to form an inseparable bound unit, and that's why it's called a bound phrase by some people, where almost never does anything come between the construct noun and the absolute noun. The construct chain will then function as a single constituent in its clause. So if I have thing 1 followed by thing 2, the construct noun followed by the absolute noun, what's going to happen here is that I will not see things intervening in between these two. I'm not going to stick, for example, an adjective in here. I'm not going to stick a preposition in between these two. These two nouns will be side by side with nothing intervening between the two. So, if there is a preposition, the preposition is going to have to attach on the outside of the construct chain, as it were, to the construct noun, not to the absolute noun. So here's an example. Here I have Beit HaMelech. There's thing 1. There's thing 2. It's Beit is house. HaMelech is king. So the house of the king. So that's my basic construct chain, keeping in mind that this functions as a single unit. Now what if I want to say not just the house of the king, but in the house of the king? What am I going to do? I have to put the preposition bet on the first member of the construct chain, which is the construct noun. Okay? So it's going to go right here. Beit HaMelech is the same here. The only place the preposition gets to go is on the first member of the construct chain. Beit HaMelech. In the Beit HaMelech. In the house of the king. So the whole construct chain, Beit HaMelech, again functions as a unit as the object of the preposition Beit. Now if I want to add an attributive adjective to describe one of the nouns of the construct chain, I can't stick it in the middle between the two nouns of the construct chain. It has to wait until the construct chain is over. So if I have Beit HaMelech, that's the house of the king. But what if I want to specify that it is a good house that is the house of the king? How do I do that? I can't stick Hatov in between Beit and HaMelech, because thing 1 and thing 2 have a fixed order and I can't let other elements intervene. So I have to put it here after the construct chain is done. Beit HaMelech Hatov then is literally the house of the king, the good, which is to say the good house of the king. So there's my attributive adjective. In English, of course, it goes in front of house, but in Hebrew I have to wait until I've gotten past the bound members of the construct chain. Alright, the second main point about construct chains and how they have to occur in Hebrew has to do with definiteness. The construct noun never, never, ever has the article attached to it. That is to say, the first noun is thing 1. It's the construct noun. I will never attach the article to it. Even if the construct noun is definite in sense, it cannot be articular. It cannot have the article. So how do you know whether to translate thing 1 as the blank of instead of a blank of? Well, the answer is to look at thing 2, the absolute noun, the second noun. Its definiteness determines whether thing 1 is definite. Okay? Let's look at some examples. We have here Beit Melech as our first example. This is thing 1. This is thing 2. I cannot attach the article to thing 1. The construct noun never takes the article. So how do I know if it's the house or a house? I look at thing 2 and notice that there is no article here. That means that both of these are indefinite. A house of a king. Now I'm going to change this in one particular way in the next example. Beit is still thing 1. I cannot put the article on it. It's not allowed in Hebrew. But notice that I do have an article here on thing 2. If thing 2 is articular and definite, then that makes thing 1 definite also. So Beit HaMelech is not a house of the king, but the house of the king. So thing 2 makes the whole thing definite. Thing 2, if it's not articular, makes the whole thing indefinite. And last I have Beit Adonai. Beit is thing 1, Adonai is thing 2. Notice that I'm translating this as the house of Yahweh. Yahweh does not have an article attached, but Yahweh is definite due to being a proper noun. Proper nouns are by definition definite, and therefore, since Yahweh is thing 2, thing 1 in construct with Yahweh must be definite. The house of Yahweh. So, definiteness in construct chains is, as I describe it here, a package deal. Either both are indefinite or both are definite. But never do you have a real construct chain where one member is definite and the other member is indefinite. So how do you say something like, a horse of the man? Or for that matter, the horse of a man? Hebrew uses a circumlocution. What's a circumlocution? It's a roundabout way of saying something. So Hebrew uses a circumlocution with the preposition lamed, and the nouns are going to be in the absolute state. They won't be in the construct. So I give you two examples here. Look at the first one. We have sus laish. Sus laish. Notice that sus is indefinite. It's a horse. Laish is definite. I have the article he swallowed up by the lamed, so I can't see it. But that is definite. So this noun is indefinite. Ish is definite. And this is how I say a horse of the man. A horse is anarthrous. There's no article. And I use the lamed preposition to indicate the possessor with the article attached to the noun. So this is, you might say, a horse belonging to the man. And that is a way to have an indefinite and a definite noun together. And what looks like it could be a construct chain, but notice this is not a construct chain. Why is it not a construct chain? It's not a construct chain because you don't have two nouns side by side where nothing intervenes. I have the preposition lamed here in between these two. Right? So this is actually a noun in the absolute state, and ish is a noun in the absolute state. There is no construct chain here. Now I can reverse the definiteness and not say a horse of the man, but the horse of a man. How do I do that? Well, I simply just make one definite and one indefinite. So I could say hasus, the horse, le, belonging to, ish, a man. The horse belonging to a man is the horse of a man. So I have to use a circumlocution like that. And I'm going to use the lamed preposition to mark possession there. So that's how you do that. Point number 3 here. Attributive adjectives modifying a noun in the construct chain must go after the nouns. And of course you would expect that, right? Attributive adjectives go where with respect to the nouns they modify? They always go after them. So they have to go after the nouns of the construct chain. And, as you'd expect, they must agree with the noun in gender, number, and definiteness. Remember, the construct noun might be definite, but you're not going to know by looking at the form because there can't be an article attached to the construct noun. So how will you know if the construct noun is definite, even if it's anarthrous? You have to look at the absolute noun, the second noun, to figure that out. So let's take a look at these examples. Here is my actual construct chain in the first example. I have sus hamelech. Sus hamalka. Sus is thing 1, horse. Hamalka is thing 2, is queen. So notice that I have an article on the queen. So this is the horse of the queen. What gender is horse? Well, horse is masculine singular. What gender is queen? The gender is feminine singular. Now look at my attributive adjective here. I have hatov. Hatov. What gender is hatov? It is masculine singular. So which of these two nouns in the construct chain does hatov modify? That is absolutely right. Attributive adjectives modify their nouns in gender, number, and definiteness. Now wait a minute. Sus doesn't have the article. Hatov does. Well, that may be true, but that doesn't mean that sus is indefinite, because thing 2 has the article. Then that makes thing 1 definite as well. And so this is the horse, and the good has to be articular as well. So good is modifying not horse, horse, but not queen, because queen is feminine singular, and if hatov were modifying that, it would have to be hatova. So this is to be translated as the good horse of the queen. The good horse of the queen. Now, what if I wanted to say the horse of the good queen? Well, all of this would have to stay the same, the horse of the queen, and the good would just have to change its gender to a comma te to match not the masculine horse, but the feminine queen. And then it would be sus hamalka hatova, and that would be the horse of the good queen. Okay? That's not what we have here. So I'll go ahead and erase that, but just so that you can see what that would have looked like had we done that. Alright, let's take a look at the second example here. For the second example, we have susot hamalka hatovot. Susot hamalka hatovot. Here's my construct chain. Susot hamalka. This is feminine plural, and it's in the construct. This is feminine singular, and it's in the absolute. It's thing 1, thing 2. Look at hatovot. Here's my attributive adjective. It has to go after the construct chain is done. And then I add it. I've got the article because the articular nature of thing 2 makes both of these definite. So this is definite. And notice I have tovot, which tells me this is feminine plural. So which of the two nouns of the construct chain are being modified by hatovot? Well, there's only one feminine plural noun here, isn't there? So it must be modifying the susot. So I need to translate this as not just the mares. Remember, this is feminine plural form of horses, so the mares. But it's what kind of mares? My attributive adjective tells me what kind of mares. It's the good mares. And I can then say of the queen. The good mares of the queen. Now, look at this next example. I have davar hamelech hatov. This is noun number 1, davar, that's a noun. Hamelech is noun number 2. This is a construct chain. The word of the king. My attributive adjective comes after it, hatov. And notice, davar is masculine singular. Hamelech is masculine singular. And hatov is masculine singular. So which of the two nouns is hatov modifying? This is ambiguous. It could go either way. So I could translate it as the good word of the king. Or I could translate it as the word of the good king. Good could be modifying either Devar or Hamelech. So there will be sometimes when you have ambiguity if the attributive adjective's gender and number matches both of the gender and numbers of the nouns in the construct chain. And then you'll have to think about your context to know which is which. Next we have Eshet Hamelech Hechakam. Eshet is the construct form of Isha, which is the noun for woman, Isha. Okay? So Eshet. Notice I have a segel tav. This is one of those feminine singular construct endings that I might find. So this is a little bit irregular compared to Isha. It's not Ishat, but Eshet. It takes on a segulate pattern. But that's thing one. Hamelech is thing two. Thing one is feminine singular because it's the wife of. Hamelech is masculine singular. And now I have Hechakam. This is my article. Okay? And Hakam has no ending, so that makes it masculine singular. So in the construct chain, I have the wife of the king, but which one of these is good, the wife or the king? Clearly, the king is wise. Okay? I don't know if I said wise or good, but this is wise. So I need to translate this as the wife of, and now I get to specify that the king is the wise king. The wife of the wise king. Okay? So that's how we translate that. On the other hand, if I have almost the identical expression here, Eshet Hamelech is my construct chain, but now I have Ha-Hakama. Notice this is feminine singular. Which one of these two nouns is feminine singular, Eshet or Hamelech? Right, it's Eshet. So, Eshet Hamelech Ha-Hakama means that the one that's wise is the wife. The wise wife of the king. Okay, the wise wife of the king. And for our final example here, look at Divrei HaShofet HaRa'im. Remember, Divrei is the masculine plural construct of Devar, Devarim. HaShofet is the judge. It's got the article. These are two nouns side by side. This one's masculine singular absolute. And so this is thing one, that's thing two. And now I have my attributive adjective, Ha-Ra-Im, with that im ending. That tells us that this is masculine plural. So which of these two nouns is being modified by Ha-Ra-Im, the wicked? Is it the first or the second? Well, the first one's the one that's masculine plural. So we need to translate the attributive adjective with that word. So it's the evil words of the judge. Okay? So Divrei HaShofet is simply the words of the judge. Ad Hara'im, and it's the words that are evil, so the evil words of the judge. Point number 4, and you find this on Ross page 104. Construct chains can have more than two members. It can have more than just one construct noun and one absolute noun. When that happens, what are we going to see here? Well, you could conceivably include an infinite number of members of construct chains. Like anyone has time for that. But keep in mind that every member of a construct chain is in the construct state except the last one, which is in the absolute state. So I may have 3 members of a construct chain, as in Eshet, Navi, Yehuda. There are 3 members of this construct chain. They're all nouns. So Eshet is thing 1, Navi is thing 2, Yehuda is thing 3. I could actually have more things than just 2. Eshet is in the construct, Navi is in the construct. Yehuda is the only one that's in the absolute because the final member of a construct chain is the only one that's in the absolute. So notice that I cannot put an article on any of the construct forms. So not on Eshet, not on Navi, and since Yehuda is a proper noun, there's no article there either, but it is a proper noun. It's therefore definite. So how am I going to translate this? It's the wife of the prophet of, and then I have my absolute noun, Judah. So you see how that works. The wife of, the prophet of Judah. Look at this next example. This is a rather lengthy construct chain. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members of the construct chain. Eshet is the construct of Isha. Avi, father, is the construct of Av. Ben is the construct of Bain. Navi is the construct of Navi. Areh is the masculine plural construct of Arim, which is the word cities. And finally, I have Haaretz, which is the absolute form of the land. Notice, all these are construct forms, and none of them can be articular. No article on Eshet, Avi, Ben, Navi, or Areh. But I do have the article on the final member, the absolute, and that makes every single one of these definite. So how am I going to translate this? The wife of, the father of, the son of, the prophet of, the cities of, the land. I could go on forever, but I didn't have the ingenuity to come up with more than that. All right, well, let's talk about how to translate the construct chain or the bound phrase. Our general strategy is going to be to use the word of in between thing 1 and thing 2. So the blank of the blank, or maybe a blank of a blank. Okay? Now, just as in English, there are a variety of ways that the second noun semantically relates to the first noun, so also with Hebrew and our construct chains. For example, we just use some English examples here. I have the horse of the king, where, if I were writing this in Hebrew, this would be thing 1, and king would be thing 2, right? The horse of the king, the thing that comes after of is the king, and the relationship of king to horse is that of possessor. The king is the possessor of the horse. So I could also translate this as the king's horse. So the horse of the king is the king's horse. And so the relationship here of king to horse is that of possession. This is possessive semantics. But take another expression like a rod of iron. Rod would be thing 1 and iron would be thing 2. And here, what we want to ask is, how is iron related to rod? Well, it's a rod made of iron. So thing 2 is the material out of which thing 1, the rod, is made. And so this is not a possessor relationship. I could not translate this as iron's rod, okay? Because iron is not the possessor of the rod. So this is not possessive semantics. It's a different kind of semantics that has to do with material. Okay? So in English, we have these different semantic nuances of using the noun of some other noun. And the same is true in Hebrew. Ross provides us with 6 semantic categories for how thing 2, the absolute noun or the genitive noun or the free form, how thing 2 relates to thing 1, which is the construct noun, the head noun, or the bound form. Now, I just need to point out here, since thing 2 is sometimes described as the genitive noun, these categories of meaning, or these semantic classifications, are often referred to as kinds of genitives. And so when we talk about genitive semantics, what we're saying is how semantically does thing 2, the genitive noun, relate to thing 1, the head noun or the construct noun. Okay? So let's just walk through these examples. And some of these come directly from Ross, some come from other places. And hopefully this will make sense. Number 1, you could have a genitive of possession. A genitive of possession. Here we have genitive noun, thing 2, semantically is the possessor of thing 1. So here in our example, we have Beit HaMelech, thing 1, thing 2. The construct is Beit, the absolute is HaMelech. Remember, the absolute noun is also the genitive noun. So what we're asking is, how is thing 2 related to thing 1? The answer here is that thing 2, the king, is the possessor of thing 1. And so I could translate this as the king's house. Okay? Whose house? Thing 2's house. The king's house. Or the house of the king. Alright? Fairly easy. Number 2. We could also have a genitive of source or authorship. And here, the genitive noun, thing 2, is the source or author of thing 1. In situations like this, thing 1 must be some kind of a noun denoting communication, as in Davar Adonai. Thing 1 is Davar, Adonai is thing 2. That thing 2 is my genitive noun. And the question is, how is Adonai related to the word word? Well, word is a word denoting communication. And if thing 2 is the author or source of that communication, of that word, then this is a genitive of source or authorship. This expression is used quite frequently in the Hebrew Bible. The word of Yahweh is the word which Yahweh spoke, or the word which Yahweh produced. He is the author or source of that word. I could have words or expressions like the oracle of someone, right? And that someone is the author of the oracle. Now, these next two I want to treat together. Number 3 category is called the subjective genitive, and number 4 is the objective genitive. In the subjective genitive, the genitive noun, thing 2, is the conceptual subject of the verbal idea that thing 1 represents. And with the objective genitive, the genitive noun, thing 2, is the conceptual object of the verbal idea that thing 1 represents. So some examples I think will make this clearer. But note, in these two sorts of categories, thing 1, the head noun or the construct noun, must be a noun that has an inherently, and this is critical, an inherently verbal notion, so that thing 2 could be related to it as the subject or the object of that verbal idea. For example, let's take the word Yeshuat Adonai. This comes from the word Yeshua, which means salvation. Okay? Salvation or deliverance. That's the absolute form with a comma say. Notice it's in the construct form with the at ending. A becomes at. So this is thing 1, this is thing 2. Salvation is the act of saving, but it is a noun, it's not a verb. But it's a noun that has an inherently verbal idea. And when thing 1 has an inherently verbal idea, thing 2 is going to be related to thing 1 as either the subject or as the object of that salvation. So which is it here? The salvation of Yahweh is what? Does somebody need to save Yahweh? Is Yahweh the object of the salvation? Probably not. This is what I would call a subjective genitive. What this really means is something like Yahweh's salvation, meaning Yahweh's act of salvation, and someone else is conceptually the direct object of that salvation. So the salvation of Yahweh is Yahweh's act of saving. Now over here we have a different thing 2. Instead of Adonai, it's Adam. Yeshuat Adam. the salvation of man. Now, if Yahweh is the one who's doing the saving, then man is related to salvation, the head noun, thing one, as the object of the salvation. So it's the act of saving man. Okay? So I would say that in the first one, we have a subjective genitive. Yahweh's doing the saving. And in the second example, we have an example of an objective genitive. Man is not doing the saving here, but rather someone is saving mankind. Presumably, Yahweh would be the one doing the saving here. Now let's take a look at Yirat Adonai, this third example. This first noun is the word Yirah, that's the absolute. Got a comma te. Notice it's in the construct form here. This is the word fear. It's a noun. Okay? It's a noun. Fear. So I have Yirat Adonai. Thing one. Thing two. This could be translated as the fear of the Lord, or the fear of Yahweh. Fear is an inherently verbal idea, and the question is, how does thing two relate to thing one as a verbal notion? Is Yahweh the subject of the fear? Is Yahweh doing the fearing? Or is Yahweh the object of the fear? I would have to say that Yahweh is the object of the fear, so this is an objective genitive. The fear of the Lord means something like our fear of the Lord. We're the ones who do the fearing, and the Lord is the one we fear. Okay? If you try to analyze this as a subjective genitive, then what you're saying is that Yahweh is not the object of the fear, but the one who is afraid. And it's hard to imagine Yahweh being the one who fears anyone or anything. Now over here, this last example is Ahavat Adonai, and the word Ahava, this is how it's spelled in the absolute, is the word love. So, how would I translate this as a construct chain? Well, it could be the love of Yahweh, okay, or the Lord. What are my possibilities here? Well, it's actually ambiguous. It could go either way here. It could be subjective genitive or objective genitive. Either of those are possible. If it's a subjective genitive, then what is it referring to? It's referring to Yahweh's love. Yahweh's love for someone. Okay? And if it's the object, of the love, if Yahweh is the object of the love, if this is an objective genitive, then it's somebody's love for Yahweh. Okay? So that's the difference between the subjective and the objective genitive. Most of the time you can tell the difference in the context of your sentences in the Hebrew Bible. Sometimes it is ambiguous and it takes a little bit more thought. Okay, number 5. We have an attributive genitive category, or a genitive of attribute. Here, in an attributive genitive, the second noun, thing 2, the genitive noun, is a descriptive attribute of thing 1. Now notice that this is like a noun plus an attributive adjective. Right? I could say ish tov, a good man, noun followed by an adjective. But here, what I have is two nouns side by side, because what we have is a construct chain consisting of thing 1 and thing 2. They're two nouns, not a noun followed by an adjective, which is what we have when we have an attributive adjective. Okay? Now, the genitive noun is thing 2. And with attributive genitives, what we're saying is that thing 2, that noun represents a kind of attribute of thing 1, a descriptive quality of thing 1. So in this expression, literally I have Har HaKodesh, the mountain of holiness. What does it mean to speak of the mountain of holiness? Well, it just simply means the holy mountain. Where holiness is a noun, but to say of holiness is really to say the holy thing, okay? So hands of holiness would be holy hands, right? A temple of holiness would be a holy temple, and the mountain of holiness would be the holy mountain. Here I have a word you don't know, mosinē. It's a masculine plural construct. You see the Canadian ending here. Thing 2 is the noun righteousness or justness. Justness. And so this is scales of justness. How would you translate this into better English? Just scales. Just scales. That is to say, scales that aren't perverted, where they have differing weights that you can cheat people with. Just scales. Scales of justness are just scales. All right, and finally, we have genitive of material. In this type of genitive, the genitive noun is going to constitute the material or the matter out of which the construct noun or thing 1 is made. So keseh is throne, zahav is gold. This is a construct chain, thing 1, thing 2. Zahav relates to keseh as constituting the material out of which the throne is made. So a throne of gold, a throne of gold, a throne made of gold is what that's saying. Here I have shevet barzel, thing 1, thing 2. Shevet is a rod, barzel is iron. So I'm going to translate this as a rod of iron, where iron is the material out of which the rod is made. That is the genitive of material.